All right, so we're here with dear Asmaa Hussein. Thank you so much for joining me today.
My pleasure.
Really appreciate it. I know you're known as, your company is Ruqaya's Bookshelf. Has become a real staple in every Muslim's home. Um, Very awesome stuff. I really enjoyed the collection of books that I saw on your website. I also enjoyed, what was also cool was that when I went to your blog section, it wasn't about children's books at all. You really have you share a lot of your personal perspectives and opinions. And, I think it takes someone who is quite confident in themselves to do that. So you are of high interest to me because I'm very drawn to people who have a lot of confidence. So, dear Asmaa Hussein, since this is all about identity, would you mind telling me a little bit about your identity, where you're born, and what kind of household you were brought up in?
Sure. So Fatima, I was born and raised in Toronto. My parents are Egyptian, so my dad came in the 70s, like
Molokhia,
so
right? You ate
yeah.
a lot of molokhia. A lot of people. See,
Yeah.
I know your food.
Yeah, but you know what's interesting? I personally don't like it. I think it's a little bit too slimy.
Okay, okay, that's okay.
Is it though? If you ask an average Egyptian, they might not say it's okay.
I squeezed all the water out. I eat it dry. But anyways, that's a whole other thing.
Yeah.
You know.
So yeah, I was born and raised in Toronto, and I grew up with five siblings. So I have three sisters and two brothers. So our house was super crazy.
And what is your placement in that? So there's six altogether.
Yeah, so I have two older siblings and three younger. So me and my sister were both in the middle.
Okay.
Um, so yeah, I don't know what that says about me, but I was sort of the middle child.
Always resenting.
Yeah. But yeah, like alhamdulillah, we had a good childhood. Ever since I was a kid, like we live right next to a library. And in Toronto, we have really good library system. So we literally me and my siblings would walk to the library
Mhm.
and just pick out like 20 books, bring it home and just like read voraciously. That's what we did for entertainment. Maybe we were boring kids, I don't know. But like that's what we had.
If you don't mind, can I ask how old you are?
I'm 30. Oh my God, how old am I? I'm 34.
Okay. So
Yeah. So
before the
yeah,
age of
like
social media.
oh yeah, for sure, for sure. I was brought up before, not even before social media, before the internet.
Right.
Like I really only started to have access to the internet when I was in maybe middle school. Before that, everything was just books, right? If you had a science project or if you had any kind of assignment to do, you'd go to the library, you'd actually speak to the librarian and say, hey, I have an assignment about XYZ. Do you have books? And he or she would um, put books on hold for you. Like there was a lot more interaction with the library and with books. So that's how I was raised. Um, yeah, I mean, I went to an Islamic school growing up.
Yeah.
Um, and then in high school, I went to a public high school. And then I went to U of T for a bachelor's degree in English and sociology. And then eventually did a master's as well in social work. It's not exactly my field now, but I feel like that really affected my worldview almost. And I think that it sort of seeps into my writing as well, the way in which I interact with the world. And I think that can be said for anything, right? Anything that you learn, any kind of experience that you have informs your worldview. So, yeah, that's me.
Fantastic. And what about your Egyptian ethnicity? Does that play a role in your writing as well?
Um, that's an interesting question. I actually don't know. I don't know because I think there's a lot about culture that's very, what's the word I'm looking for? That kind of flies under the radar that we don't even realize is culture. Because a lot of times when I think about culture, I think about the things that we eat, the way that we speak to each other, the clothes that we wear, the values that we hold dear, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
But it's a lot deeper than that. Like on the surface level, I'm not super connected to my culture. I guess because I was born and raised here. Only ever really visited Egypt a couple of times in my life. Um, but yeah, like I probably identify more as a Canadian than an Egyptian. But I'm sure still that there is something there in
Mm-hmm.
how I was raised that is reflected in my writing or in my work. It's just not a tangible thing.
Okay, that's interesting. Well, you already said you didn't like Momohea, so you already divided, you already separated yourself,
Yes.
right there. So
Yeah.
you have your own publishing company, and to my understanding, that's not an easy thing to do. And how
It's
difficult
not.
is it? How difficult is it for you to start? How difficult was it to start, and how is it now to maintain?
So it's funny because I didn't actually set out to start a publishing company. Like that wasn't sort of, how some people start out what they're doing and they have like a clear goal. Okay, I want to reach this in 5 years and 10 years. I didn't really have that. It was more about my writing. So I wrote, and it started with my book called The Temporary Gift. So I wrote that and I worked really hard on it. And then I started sending it out to publishers. And I specifically wanted an Islamic publisher because there's a lot of faith-based stuff in the book that I thought would be most suitable for, I would say, a majority Muslim audience. So it was interesting. And I think the responses I got sort of led me on this path because, for example, I had one publisher get back to me and say, this is a really good book. We love it, but we don't publish books that have any sort of like political undertone, I guess. If perhaps that wasn't her wording, but that was essentially what she was saying, that this book is too political. And it's not a super political book, but it was too much for them. And I think at that point, I was thinking, well, am I going to change what is so authentically my story in order to fit somebody else's criteria
Mm-hmm.
for what's like an acceptable thing to publish? And I thought, I don't want to do that because um, this, I think that's the case for any book that's like really close to you. And it's not like it's not fiction, right? For fiction, you can change things around and you're not as attached, but
Yeah.
for your personal story, like how much are you going to change your personal story to fit in with somebody else's, viewpoint?
Mm-hmm.
So I thought, okay, you know what? I'm going to try to actually just put this book out on my own. So I did so much research and I like spent countless hours trying to figure out like all the different details that would go into getting a book out. And then at that point, I thought, okay, let me start a website. So it was kind of just like step by step until a point came where I realized, you know what, I really love books. I really love this process. I think it's interesting and I think it's needed. So why don't I start something called Ruqaya's Bookshelf? And it was kind of just like these little baby steps almost. Um, yeah. And
That's,
then years later, I am where I am now, alhamdulillah. But like it took, yeah, it wasn't like a clear cut thing in the beginning. I think it was something that took a lot of time. And I eventually got there.
mm-hmm. I was under the impression that it was one of your more recent books. I think because of the way of it was laid out on your website as
Yeah.
as as kind of separate from the children's books, and I thought you had started with the children's books and then eventually went up to more of a personal stories. But now that you say that, it totally um, makes sense that you would be very motivated to, or almost like guided to take these particular steps.
Mm-hmm. Well, I do have, so A Temporary Gift is sort of the first project that I worked on, but
Mhm.
I have another adult book, A Place of Refuge. That is the most recent book that came out in April of this year, so just a few months ago. So yeah,
Received a lot of positive feedback, I see. All
yeah, yeah.
books have 5-star reviews, mashallah. I don't know.
Alhamdulillah. I mean, I'm happy. I'm happy that people are finding good in it and finding ways to connect to that writing.
Hmm. So about your book, A Temporary Gift, you wrote about the loss of your husband. Um, how has it been for you writing about that and sharing about your traumatic experiences?
Hmm. Um, that's an interesting question. I get asked this a lot, actually.
Mm,
And I think a lot of times people assume that it's something really hard to do.
okay.
Um, and not to say that it isn't, because it's still a struggle to share the most vulnerable parts of yourself with the world. Because when you do that, you're opening yourself up to like a lot of critique, a lot of comments, snide comments, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
But I think for me, I started writing very, very shortly after my husband passed away. And I didn't really think I'm going to put this into a book. It was just a way to process my emotions. And that's just sort of my personality. I've always processed my emotions through writing. So
Hmm.
even as like a teenager, I remember having, I had a blog, I would journal, I would write poetry. Like I was just that kind of person. I loved writing. So for me, I started it for my own sanity almost. Um, and I remember at that time I would post stuff. I would just post it on Facebook because that's kind of the audience that I had, like the place that I had access to.
Right.
I didn't even get onto Instagram till like much later. But yeah, and then I saw that people were interacting really well with it and really connecting it to their own experiences, which was surprising because I didn't necessarily set out to help others connect. It was more about just my having to get what I was feeling out onto a page, basically.
Hmm.
And then eventually I actually started getting a lot of people messaging me saying, "Can you put all of your writing into a book? Because like we want to have it like a physical copy that we can refer to." And at that point, I'm like, "Oh, okay, maybe I should." So everything kind of happened. I feel like a lot of stuff happened backwards.
Right.
Is that like a thing? Yeah, like it
Right.
wasn't like I didn't set out to write a book. I didn't set out to start a publishing company.
Yeah.
Everything kind of just like fell into place. Like subhanAllah, it's pretty amazing. But yeah, writing is being vulnerable in general is hard, and it's
Hmm.
a skill that you have to work at. But I think
That
the
you
benefit,
it's a skill. Yeah.
yeah, the benefit that comes out um, is really amazing for yourself and for other people around you. Because I don't like a lot of people suffer in silence with so many different things, grief, different kinds of trauma. They suffer in silence because they think that people are going to judge them for not being like strong, faithful Muslims and
Mhm.
just like being patient and being silent. But we know that patience doesn't equal silence, right? Um, so yeah, I think when you really open yourself up and you're vulnerable like that, a lot of people benefit, not just yourself.
Mhm. And how have you used your faith in your healing process?
Yeah, that's a good. I think it was like front and center from the beginning until now, and I think having this trust in God is sort of the thing that got me through the thing that got me through it, because I think if I didn't have that, I would have struggled. Um, I wouldn't say more or less, but in a very different way than I did.
Mhm.
Because the way that I struggled was just over sadness and grief and that kind of trauma. But I always had somewhere to go to address it. I always had like dua or prayers. I always had things to like the Quran to read that would comfort me. Like there was always something there
Mhm.
that I truly, genuinely believed in, um, that would sort of help me just get to the next day. You
Yeah.
know, and there's a lot of really beautiful things in our religion, like in the Quran and the Hadith, that it just gives you hope that there's something more out of that comes from life than just what you're suffering through. You know, that everything has a purpose. There's a higher purpose to everything, and
Mhm.
that if you can just remain patient for now, you're gonna see the benefits of it.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Beautiful. So you talk about receiving this very positive feedback about your writing, but you know with with the things that you share on your blog and your social media posts, do you receive any negative comments and negative feedback?
I mean, sometimes it's kind of what happens though. I think it's what happens with anybody who does anything who does anything basically. If you're online in any kind of public way, whether you have 1,000 followers or like 100,000 followers, it doesn't matter. Like if you're online in any sort of public way, or you put a comment on almost anything, you're going to get that kind of feedback. And that's what makes the internet kind of a troubling place sometimes. But it's okay. Like I feel like I've gotten much more positive than negative. And so at the beginning, the negative comments used to kind of set me off, but over time, I kind of just let them roll off my back. And I'm like, you know what? It comes with the territory.
Right.
I mean, it's unfortunate, but it happens, right?
I'm glad you let it roll off your back, you know, let haters hate.
Let haters hate. Yeah. I mean, you know what though? Like if someone has like an actual critique of my work or something, and they want to talk about it and they want to be constructive about it, I'm happy to actually sit and listen. Because I think that especially with writers, you do have to be willing to go through some critique of the work. You know, if somebody couldn't connect to the writing, or if they disagree with something you wrote, that's perfectly fine. And I welcome that kind of discussion. But it's almost like just the hateful comments or like the mean-spirited comments. That's kind of where we draw the line.
Well, who could write anything mean-spirited? I mean, you're writing children's books, you know.
You'd be surprised, Fatma. Somebody will always find something to say, something they didn't like, or you never know. Yeah.
So you do have a lot of books. Are they all your material?
No, so some of them are written by me, but quite a few of them are written by other authors. So I started off with my own writing, but then I opened it up to people to be able to submit manuscripts. And then on our website, I have like a list, guidelines of what kind of manuscripts we're looking for. And to me, that's exciting because I like the idea of providing a platform for other Muslims to tell their stories. And I think that mainstream publishing they've improved, and you can find books with Muslim characters, but it's just not fast enough for me. I think that, you know, for Ruqaya's bookshelf to come in and do this and only this, I think that plays a part, you know. So I still think that Muslims should pursue publishing in the mainstream. I think that's really important. And this is just a part of it. So it's not something that's like supposed to replace others. It's just a part of the puzzle.
Right. And so what problem do you think Ruqaya's bookshelf solves?
I think when I started out, I saw a lot of books because I guess when my daughter was growing up, when she was just a baby, essentially, I wanted, like, books were her thing too. Like she loved books and she would spend hours cuddling with books. She would take books to bed. It was super weird. That's just like her thing. So I tried to find her books with Muslim characters, and I always found the very Muslim books were always very instructive, and not super entertaining. So it would be more about like teaching kids about the religion as opposed to a really entertaining story, which I think is fine. Like, again, everything has a place, right? So you have on one end these stories that are just instructive, not super interesting, but they play a role. And then on the other hand, you'll have books that, you know, are in the mainstream that, and like I said, it's improving now, but in the past, they have characters that are Muslim, but it's often very watered down and sort of just like in the background, or either that or not necessarily representing them in the right way, or even in a dismissive way. And I thought there's this huge gap in the middle where kids want to be entertained, right? But they also want to see themselves reflected in books. They want their authentic stories to be told. they want to see the word masjid in a book and just have it be a normal thing, you know? And I think that piece of identity as, like, I want kids to grow up seeing themselves as not other, seeing themselves as just normal. Like, my identity is perfectly acceptable. Like, I'm a Muslim. I have books that cater to me. I have products that cater to me, spaces that cater to me. I think that's really important for kids.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So tell me about your creative process.
You know, it's funny when people ask me about my creative process, I'm like, I don't have one. um, so my creative process changes over time, and it changes with every project that I'm working on. I know that some people have like a specific time of day that they do the work and stuff. For me, like, for example, with my first book, my daughter was, I think, 2.5 when I was working on that book. I would work in the mornings before she woke up, early morning, and then during her nap times, because that was like the only time that I had. So I had kind of a routine going. But as she grew older, she no longer naps during the day. She wakes up earlier, she sleeps later. So everything kind of had to shift. And then when my daughter went to school, then I had time during the day. During COVID, I now have no time at all. So I end up staying up like too late into the night, because that's kind of the only time that I have to work. So everything is kind of just me adapting to life circumstances. Um, I mean, there is something to be said about like scheduling time in to do your creative work, but at the same time, life happens, man. Life happens. So in terms of the creative process, like, I might have an idea and I'll write it down, and it won't actually get done till 2, 3 years later.
Oh,
Because by the time, yeah, it takes, I think a lot of people don't realize books take a long time. So by the time you see something actually come out and be ready to purchase, it has taken minimum 1 year in
mm-hmm.
like the development of that book.
Why did
Um,
it take so long?
it takes a long time because, so you start with an idea, you write it down, and then it has to go through so many phases of editing to make sure that it's the best story that it can be. And that sometimes takes weeks and months of work. And then all like the design and illustration and printing, everything takes a lot of time.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but yeah, I don't know if that answers your question. You said, what's your creative process? And I said, I don't have one.
That's interesting. Okay, so when do you think that idea comes into your mind? Do you find it's when you're more relaxed?
Um, that's also a hard question, Fatima, because that it's happened so many different ways. Like, I remember there's one of my first kids' books was Bismillah Soup, and that idea came to me in the shower. I guess because, like, I guess a lot of ideas come to us in the shower because
Right.
we're not really thinking about anything or engaged in anything, so our minds are more free. But for that, like, the idea for the entire story just came into my head, the entire story, which is ridiculous. That's not usually what happens. um, and then other times, for example, I have a book called Snatched. That book was actually based on like a saying of the Prophet, sallallahu, like a hadith. And I really liked the hadith, and I thought this is a really important moral, if you want to talk about it that way, that I want to build a story around.
Mm-hmm.
And then I have another book that I'm still working on it now. Um, I can't even remember how. I think I was out with my daughter at a park with her cousins or something, and we were talking about. I guess I shouldn't talk about it because it's still being edited.
Okay.
We were talking about, let's make this very vague. We were talking about something, and
Yeah.
then that sparked some kind of idea in my head. That's so vague, right?
It's your company. You're not gonna get in trouble.
No, I'm not, but it's still being worked on, so I don't necessarily want to say anything
Yeah.
about it. But yeah, and I you know what, I think inspiration comes in so many different forms,
Mhm.
and we just have to be open to it, because sometimes we get ideas and we're like, nah, that's dumb, or like that's not going to work or something. But I think honor the ideas that pop into your head,
So then,
because
do you
yeah.
bounce your ideas off of like a social circle?
Usually I'll talk to my sisters about it. I have two. Okay, oh my God, actually all three of my sisters are teachers. So they all teach young kids. And
Great.
one of them is also, or two of them actually have also written as well. So it's like a built-in, like in my family, I have this little group of people who I can bounce ideas off of. And then I also have like a couple of friends who will ask to look at a draft of something I've written. But I think it's really important to actually hire like a qualified individual to actually look over your work. Because
Hmm.
I think a lot of times when people go off, sorry, this is a tangent, but a lot of times when people go and they start publishing their own work, um, it's hard to do that if you aren't willing to get critique from an actual editor or from somebody who's qualified.
Hmm.
So I try to remove like my hurt feelings when someone says something's not working. I try to remove that and like actually let that in because that's healthy.
Yeah, but absolutely. But that must be hard because sometimes to start again or to scrap your work, that can be difficult. So
Yeah, yeah, it's difficult. Yeah.
tell me about one of the more popular books that you sell and why you think it's so popular.
So kids books or adult books or anything?
Uh, Both. Let's start with the children's
Both.
books. Yeah.
Okay, kids books. So my first book, Bismillah Soup, has always sold the best. And I actually don't even know why. Like, I've been trying to study it and being like, what is the secret sauce of this book that sells better than other books? I actually don't know. I don't know why. I think it's just an intriguing concept, Bismillah Soup. And then The Green Dinosaur Umbrella is one of our more recent books, and that one actually is almost out of stock. We just published it in March, I believe. It was just around the time when the whole world was turning upside down, basically. Um, because I think that one is really popular because it's related to Hajj. And I think a lot of Muslim parents are looking for books that will make familiar these sort of rituals that we have without it being like very text heavy, very instructive. So it's a story. It's not, and it just happens to happen during Hajj time. And then like you see all the steps of Hajj outlined in the book, but it's
Mhm.
just an entertaining story. So even if you sort of, I mean, no, not if you take the Hajj obviously plays a role in it,
Right.
but it's just like a fun, entertaining story.
Right.
Yeah.
So the entertainment is perhaps a little secret. I mean, everyone
Yeah.
likes to be entertained, right?
The thing is, every story has to be interesting in some way. It has to be entertaining or funny or touching. It has to evoke some kind of emotion.
Hmm.
Um, that's really, I wouldn't say it's number one, but it's equal to the other sort of motivation of representation and authenticity and that kind of thing. Entertainment always has to be up there because for me, I want a child to pick up my book and not just read it and then put it on the shelf and never go to again. I want it to be those kinds of books that kids come back to again and again and again. Because kids tend to do that with books they really like. They'll
Yeah.
read the book like 30 times. Like sometimes my child reads there's a book that she used to love so much. She literally read it 50 times. I was so annoyed by the end. I'm like, you need to stop.
Stop
It was
reading.
Robert Munch.
Oh,
He has a book
yes.
called Braids,
Okay.
and it's all about a girl who gets her hair braided, and it's a really cute story. It's a funny story, but she read it literally 50 times until like it was frayed and just like falling apart. And I'm like, you know what? That's a good book because she loved it so much that she was coming back to it. And
Hmm.
it's the entertainment factor. It's like it's really entertaining, it's funny, it's bright, it's colorful. And I want our books to be that for kids.
Hmm. Yes, that'll keep them coming back for more.
Yeah.
What do you think you would do if it weren't for this publishing company?
I have no idea. I have no idea. You know, in my wildest dreams, I'm like, oh, you know, someday when I retire, I'm gonna do XYZ. I'm gonna go sit on an island and just like sit there for the remaining years of my life. But I honestly don't know what I would do. I mean, my field is social work, and I always imagined myself to continue into that field at some point. Even when I started Ruqaya's Bookshelf, I always like kept my social work registration up to date, just
Hmm.
in case I wanted to go back to it. But at this point, I don't know if I would be interested enough to go back to it. I think because I see the real life impact of the work that I'm doing,
Mm-hmm.
and that like the books can actually go into the homes of Muslim families and be a part of the love that they share and a part of like their experiences growing up. And I think that's really meaningful. But you never know. Maybe I will someday go back to social work.
Yeah. Well, I mean,
Yeah.
in a sense, the things that you do is a type of social work.
Yeah.
Right? So
Yeah,
that's
I would say so actually. Yeah.
um, one last question for you. Uh, what are the best and the worst things about working with the Muslim community?
Oh gosh, do you have like an hour? Okay, let's start with the best. I think the best things about working with the Muslim community is I feel seen and understood, and that I don't have to come to the table and explain my identity and explain, okay, this is why I wear hijab. This is why I believe what I believe. This is why this value is important to me, and just constantly have to fight that battle.
Mm-hmm.
And um, and I like that. I like finding a place of just comfort. And I think that I do my best work when I feel safe and comfortable. And I feel like the people around me are open to
Mm-hmm.
understanding me and understanding my work. I think that's really important to create those safe spaces. Um, is really good. I mean, it's good for me, and I think a lot of people do need that.
Absolutely.
Um, the worst things, I think, it's hard for me to say whether this is because it's a Muslim community or not, because I've heard from other businesses that don't cater to the Muslim community that they've had similar experiences. I think it's just a business experience that um, you'll have customers coming in always wanting discounts,
Mm-hmm.
not really, sometimes not really seeing the value in what you do. Unfortunately, sometimes sort of plagiarizing and copying what you do and like reproducing it. I had this issue with my book, A Temporary Gift. Like it was reproduced and sold, excuse me, sold. Ha, I'm speaking too much. So my throat is getting dry. I'm not used to speaking this much because we're all still in sort of isolation. So we're,
Well,
um,
that must have made you very, very upset.
yes, it did. It really did. And this was probably like 2 years ago, I want to say, when I found out about it. And I mean, it's unfortunate, but a lot of other Muslim authors have had the same experience. So if their work is seen as valuable, sometimes it's taken without their permission or shared without their permission or whatnot, or even distributed for free without their permission.
Mm-hmm.
And that can be really frustrating. So along with the work that I do, I think raising awareness of this issue, like this copyright issue,
Mm-hmm.
is also one of the things that Muslim authors are working towards, so that people can understand that it's important to appreciate the work and to actually pay for the work.
And not steal.
Yeah, I mean, you'd think that it would be like a completely logical, like you'd think, okay, Muslims don't steal, right?
Right.
But they find ways to justify what they're doing. Like it's super weird. Like they almost think that they're doing something good by spreading knowledge or whatever, but it's like, but you're
But there,
stealing.
yeah.
Yeah, yeah. It's, I mean, it can get frustrating, but I always try to remind myself of the good more than the bad.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. And sometimes, working in the community, I think it's just anything that goes wrong can be, I guess, magnified perhaps a little bit more just because
Hmm.
it is a smaller group. But you're
Yeah.
exactly right. Those things absolutely would happen in any sort of community. It
Yeah.
just hurts more when it comes from your own, you know.
It hurts more because I said before that you feel safe and you feel like you can let your guard down,
Mhm.
in the Muslim community. And for the most part, you can, I think. For the most part, people are understanding and good about these things. But
Mhm.
there's always going to be that fringe that is just going to, get on your nerves.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, dear Asma Hussein, it was great speaking to you and listening to your perspectives and thoughts. I know that you said, you mentioned you can't really talk too much about your future projects, but can you give us maybe a clue, a hint of what to expect from you in the near future?
Yeah, so sure. I mean, we're working on like a couple of new picture books. One of the exciting projects is I'm working with an author who's writing a chapter book series, so 5 books centered around one character, and that'll be sold as like a sort of like a box set, which will be nice for kids who are a little bit older. And I do want to eventually branch out more into that older age group because I think there's a lot of picture books now for Muslim kids specifically. Um,
Sorry,
and
what is the difference? So I'm so sorry. I thought what you do now is picture books.
so we do picture books,
Okay.
and we only have 2 chapter books. So chapter books are for ages like 8 and up. So it's just more text heavy. It's a longer story. It's a more in-depth story.
Mhm.
Whereas picture books are for kids who are like 3 and up, basically. Um, but yeah, I do want to eventually go into an age group that's a little bit older, sorry, because I think when kids start to get a little older, then they grapple a little bit more with like identity issues and that kind of thing. And there should be really good, wholesome content for that age group.
What age group is that?
So like 8 to 12,
Hmm.
maybe. And obviously, there's a need for content for like teens as well, but I'm just not there yet. Like,
Oh, that's
it's
a
not.
tough one.
It's yeah. That's a bit tough. And it's harder to. It's like kind of like young adult. You're veering into like the young adult genres, which is it's different from what I do. Maybe someday we'll get there, but for now we're focusing on
Hmm.
like what we've been working on and what we know that we can do well.
I'm sure you're going to do amazing. And just
Inshallah.
one last question. So would I be able to find one of your books at like chapters or something like that?
Um, Maybe someday in the future. It's sold. The books are sold by different like small bookstores in Canada and the U.S., even overseas. But the best place to get it is always the website ruqayasbookshop.com. We've got like coupons and free shipping and all that fun stuff.
Well, people love, free, so free
Yes.
shipping.
Yeah. Exactly.
Thank you so much for your time. Really
My
appreciate it.
pleasure.
And we'll talk again soon, inshallah.
Inshallah. Thanks, Fatah.